Hi, I am OLGA FLORES from Bolivia, one of the first Unitarian Universalists in Latin America. In this brief presentation, we are going to show our visions, our hopes, and what means and represent for us Unitarian Universalists from Latin America.
Metebe mambo, yete bumu, metebe mambo, yete bumu, ne metebe medi, mambo, yete bumu, ne metebe mambo, yete bumu, metebe mambo, yete bumu, ne metebe medi, mambo, yete bumu, ne bo mediti na himoyete.
A decade has gone by since the first small groups of Unitarian Universalists appeared in Latin America. The emergence of these groups can be understood as a response to the region's particular spiritual needs in this moment in history. The Unitarian groups that have been emerging in Latin America lack a long history. However, this does not mean that we have not observed the Unitarian tradition truly. To understand the relevance of Unitarianism in Latin America today, we must first take a brief look at history. Having been colonized by Spain and Portugal, Latin America was de facto isolated from the influence of the Reform. So, while in Europe, Unitarianism evolved as the Reform's most radical faction, Latin America was dominated by a monolithic faith. No tolerance was afforded to the continent's diverse religious traditions. As we will see later, a remarkable keenness exists between contemporary Unitarianism and Latin America's indigenous religious visions. During hundreds of years of domination, the sword and the cross of the Spaniards and Portuguese not only denied but also punished the practice of our memorial religious traditions. Labeling this body of the spiritual richness as vulgar idolatry. Our aim is to develop an original, forward-looking Unitarianism that will recover and build upon Latin America's religious and diverse spiritual legacy. Thus, we must work hard to recover the spirituality of our, until now, repressed indigenous cultures. exist three main elements that inspire the creation of Unitarianism in Latin America. First, immemorial indigenous tradition. Second, Christian and Western influence, which is, for good or for bad, an undeniable part of our spiritual landscape. And third, the African American rituals and traditions. Only remaining true to these elements will be able to address our particular spiritual needs. To understand religion in Latin America today, we must first acknowledge its origins and its hybrid nature. Its origin was the encounter or clash of civilizations between the Spanish or Portuguese and Latin Americans' many ethnic groups. We can imagine the cultural shock on both parts. The Spanish seeing, in some cases, nude or semi-nude civilizations with very diverse beliefs. The natives, on the other hand, saw people completely covered with elaborated clothes, long beards, and brought with them a sole faith in a sole book, the Bible. The Spanish found it nearly impossible to understand the logic and access the knowledge of Latin America's natives. For instance, the Aymara people of Bolivia considered two to be less than one, because one was for them totality, two was only a fraction of the totality, a half, and hence less. From the simple act of folding their ponchos, they discovered exponentials, the highly productive systems of the agrarian production that allowed indigenous peoples to domesticate potatoes, corn, tomatoes, cocoa were inseparable from the religious traditions and relationship indigenous societies held with Mother Earth, Pachamama. Most religious traditions in Latin America place the cosmos as the main point of reference. Hence, the relationship with the sun, the moon, or the mountains, a symbol of the cosmos, was mistaken by the Spaniards as the most vulgar of idolatries. Another example of this profound misunderstanding is that of the Guaranis Indians, whose lack of rituals or religious temples portrayed them as extremely primitive in the view of the Europeans. However, careful ethnographic studies reveals that they actually practice a highly developed and philosophical rich religion. The Guaranis were the theologians of America. Their sense of life was to find a land without evil. The Guarani lacked temples because God is everywhere. Hence, the Guarani refused the expression of materialist societies and rather seek to live in a communion with nature. In an attempt to retain the religious practices that were paramount in their lives, our indigenous people disguised their traditions and rituals within their practice of Christianity. What emerged was a very interesting hybrid. Religious syncretism is today a fundamental part of the spiritual religious landscape. Having spoken of our indigenous legacy at some length, we can now consider the religious influence of African rituals and traditions.
Vimbo, vimbo mfana, vimbo
the Spaniards and Portuguese faced a problem in procuring the labor force needed to exploit their colonies. The indigenous people couldn't be subject of slavery, while African slavery had been accepted for a very long time. It was further justified on religious grounds by the Catholic Church. This was the start of African slavery in Latin America. The slaves that would work the sugarcane fields and the mines of Potosi brought with them the religious traditions from their native African west coast. In Brazil, this African religious influx met and intermingled richly with the traditions of the native as well as with Christianity. The result was a very unique religious syncretism. So far, we have mentioned Christianity in relation with the indigenous vision and the traditions of African Americans. Let's now consider its influence in today's spirituality more concretely. Intolerance of Catholicism is a logical consequence of its monotheist vision. Christianity imposes a fragmentary vision that is reflection of its separate understanding of God and human beings, the division between the sacred and profane, life and death. There is a single way of finding God, by suffering, repent and praying. More importantly, Catholicism teaches its believers that we can reach God only through the Catholic Church. In contrast, the indigenous religious traditions of the Americans are characterized by a personal experience of divinity, a belief that God and Goddess live in the same world as us, a belief in the existence of a parallel life and world after death. Songs and dances are seen to linkage between everyday experience and the divine or the divine within. In Latin America, people dance in the carnival to thank the Virgin Mary or the Pachamama for their blessings or miracles. Dancing in Latin America is a ritual and represents a form of establishing a link between the sacred. We can see from everything said so far that our Unitarian heritage from the past includes love from Christianity, tolerance from syncretism, the intermingling of religious traditions, the holy sense of nature from the indigenous cosmovisions, how to find liberation from suffering by dancing and corporal experiences from the Africans. We seek freedom, justice from the martyrs of independence and those who fought for freedom and democracy against the brutality of dictatorships more recently. We, Bolivian Unitarians, have been recovering our heritage by celebrating the Holy Day of Todos Santos, the celebration preceding the Day of the Dead, in which we celebrate our gratitude toward the dead, as well as their visit. This is a deeply syncretic celebration, since it draws upon indigenous traditions relating the relationship with the dead. Christmas, Easter flower, the Chaya, when we celebrate our gratefulness to Mother Earth, the Pachamama, the Andean New Year in the winter equinox. Recognizing and expressing our reverence for the Pachetas or holy places of nature as the spirit of life. We often take long walks in the mountains, which we see as forms of temples. Our mission is also to bring hope to a continent of despair. Latin America is a continent of extreme poverty and unequal distribution, great social injustice. As Unitarians that support the dignity of human life, we activists for social justice and human rights. We promote improvements in healthcare, education, and solidarity.
¿Cómo pensaba? ¿Cómo abrir el pecho y sacar el alma? Una cuchillada de amor. Una vez por siempre bien. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Como un documento inalterable, yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón.
However, our principal contribution in this front will be to organize an interfaith league that will develop an ethical conscience to change the anthropocentric ethic that justifies the indiscriminate use of natural resources, the mass killing of wildlife, and environmental degradation. We will put an end to the belief that only human beings have the right to a decent life. This woman shows us the pure ethic of reverence of life. She tenderly takes care of all forms of life. Unitarianism is a hope for women. Women in Latin America live under a terrible oppression. Poverty has a woman's face. Our challenge is to generate a spiritual force that will challenge all discriminatory customs. Why join the International Council of Unitarian Universalists? We are aware that it is impossible to build a better world of our own. We need to build a human net of solidarity to resolve the problems of the human family. As human beings, we are part of a society body and have to start being more consequent with our responsibility toward our fellow men and women. Let's all join forces together in a religious movement to improve the life for everybody.